Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about what intentional college prep actually looks like, from exploring interests with purpose to preparing for the critical junior year transition. And so today I'm joined by Megan, an Ingenious Prep counselor who has helped students gain admissions to Ivy League schools and other top 30 universities. Hi, Megan. Welcome.
Thank you, Jillian. Very excited to be here today.
Same, I'm very excited. We have lots to chat through today. But before we begin, could you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Ingenious Prep?
Yeah, definitely. So I have been with Ingenious for the past 6 years. Before that, many years ago, I graduated with a BA in economics from Duke University. I worked in consulting for a few years, health consulting specifically. So then I moved to Vietnam on a Princeton in Asia fellowship. I worked in healthcare over there for another year before deciding I really just loved living abroad and wanted to stay longer. And that is where I discovered my love of teaching. I ended up moving to Thailand and I taught on the Thai-Burma border for 2 years, working with refugees. I moved back to the US and did a formal teacher training program and taught for a few more years before going back to grad school, where I got my doctorate in occupational therapy. Many of my students don't know what that actually means. It's essentially working with people with disabilities. The reason it really appealed to me was because it combined my two passions, both for education and healthcare. But as soon as I graduated into COVID. So I ended up working for Ingenious, and 6 years later, here I am. I totally fell in love with the work that we do with our students. It brings a lot of my teaching background into it, but it also allows for so much space for creativity and just like constant learning. I find it really rewarding to work one on one with students. And these days, I still do direct student work and I also manage our training for our new counselors as well.
Let's start with talking about interest exploration, because I know we talk a lot about that at Ingenious, especially during the middle school period and early high school. So, what does intentional exploration actually really mean? And how is it different from just trying like different random activities overall?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And one we get a lot from our new younger students and families. So, one of the first things I like to do when I'm starting with a younger student is during one of our first meetings, go to the website of one of the universities that they're really excited about. If they're totally unsure, I'll go for Stanford because Stanford has tons and tons of majors and a lot of kind of niche, more unique majors that you wouldn't even think about. So Stanford doesn't just have environmental science. They've got like 10 variations on environmental science, which is really cool. So most students have no idea. They have maybe 10 classes they can choose from in high school, and that's the world that they're exposed to. So I think that the first thing that's important is showing them the world that's out there beyond the classes that are available to them in high school. I like to go through all the options with students and then narrow down to a short list, whatever that looks like. They could be excited about a potential major they've really never explored or had anything to do with, or they might find a few majors that are exciting to them because they feel familiar to things they already like. But once we come up with that short list, then we do set out on that sort of intentional interest exploration. Like you said, it's an interest exploration with a purpose and a timeline. Because I think that what can happen, of course, is that students are waiting for that sort of aha moment. Oh my gosh, I totally know that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so I also try to back them away from that because what you want to major in college and the profile you're setting up in high school don't have to dictate the next 50 years of your life. So, what we start with is just what are you interested in right now? And how do these interests connect to potentially your future career goals? And then we do explore whatever that short list is in a very deliberate, timed manner. I would say that we're aiming to figure out what the student's most interested in around the end of ninth grade, because at that point, it's important to start specializing and digging deeper. But one thing I do like to emphasize to students, because I know that can feel really scary, and maybe some students listening to this are older than that and they're still unsure, and that's okay. Your college major, especially for American universities, does not entail this like huge commitment for the rest of your life. So I think it's actually a little bit of a misconception that, especially for a lot of our international students, the major that you put down on your application is not necessarily the major that you are committing to studying when you're at university. For the majority of universities, you don't actually declare your official major until you're in your first or second year on campus. So while it's a good idea to obviously narrow down your interest area and build up a competitive profile, that is more with the goal in mind of getting into college and not necessarily dictating the path that you take while you're in college and beyond. So I think that helps scale down this really scary big thing that kids are worried about and make it a little bit more approachable.
Yeah, that's really interesting because even starting at eighth grade, that's a really young age to start narrowing down what they like because they're so young and they're probably interested in so many other things. But when they kind of transition or on the way to transitioning to their junior year, is it okay if your student changes their interest multiple times? And what would that look like? Would that affect their activities list in the Common App in the future?
That's a very good question. So, obviously, students aren't going to be certain about what they want to do. And I see that a lot. Like, students pursue one thing and then they maybe change their minds. What I try to do with students is build on the foundation that they've created. And personally, I actually think that it makes for a much more competitive profile if you are combining multiple disciplines you're interested in, or even talking about a double major, maybe. For example, let's say that a student started working with us in eighth or ninth grade and was really interested in biology. And then by the time they got around to junior year, they're finding that they're more interested in history, which feel like two really different things. What we would not want the student to do is just to start over from scratch and build a history profile starting in junior year, because they're going to lack a lot of the depth that other students will have. But what I think could make their profile a lot more interesting is combining those interests and developing an application persona centered around the history of science or the history of biology. And now that's actually a very niche major. Harvard actually offers that major. Some other top schools do. There's a major called Science, Technology, and Society that is more a social science version of the sciences. And so, what I would do if students change their mind or want to pursue something new as they get older is try to build it into what they've already done. I actually think that a student who, is a history of science major and has activities that show both a science and history interest, as well as the combination of those two things, it's probably going to be a more interesting and competitive applicant than just the biology kid alone. So I think that adding more interests later on and or refining and making your interests more specific is important and is not a bad thing.
Can you walk us through an example of a student who explored an interest well?
Yes, definitely. As a student that I'm working with right now comes to mind because I started working with him in ninth grade. And one of the first things he told me was, I don't want to do things just for my college application. And I loved that because I don't want to just make kids do things for their college applications. I hope that our work together is like fun, rewarding, and engaging to them. We're supposed to be really pulling out what they're genuinely interested in and helping them pursue those things they're passionate about. So this student started right off the bat, very clear. He wants to do what he wants to do. He doesn't want to do it to get into college. At the same time, of course, he wants to go to college. He wants to go to a good school, all of those same goals that all of our students have. And when we first started working together, he was really passionate about robotics and engineering. And so those are some of the most competitive majors. So I knew from the beginning we just had to really help him build a competitive profile, help him stand out from the crowd. He's also really interested in fencing and he's a high level fencer. So we combined those interests to make a signature project for him that feels very, very genuine. Again, not something that he's just doing for his applications. He noticed at one of the big fencing competitions he went to that there's this particular like piece of equipment called the body cord, and they're very easily broken or damaged. And so he just started like picking them up and collecting them, the broken and damaged ones at a fencing tournament he went to, and repairing them. Like just because he's an engineer and he tinkers and he thinks that's fun. So he told me he was doing that, and I just thought that was so cool. And we scaled up that project to where now he actually has an official partnership with USA Fencing. He's created his own organization where he trains other student volunteers to help him pick up and repair these body cords. And he's also designing his own body cord that's like less breakable, more durable. So that's an example of a student really following his genuine passions and how by doing that, it can make for a much more unique and interesting profile, just this student who's really into engineering and doing robotics.
Yeah, that is actually really impressive for parents out there because they're always asking on social media, like, oh, my kid needs help. He's a little bit worried about his application not being impressive. I'm not sure what to do, but I think this is actually a good story and an example. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go ahead and talk about grades and test scores. I know a lot of people are worried about that, but that's not the most important right now, right? I think a lot of schools have all these smart students with like amazing grades, but what are the most important soft skills that students should be developing as early as eighth or ninth grade?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think that the soft skills are really important and they do absolutely come through in the application, in the activities list, in the essays, in the letters of recommendation. So obviously, grades are going to tell one story, but the soft skills, personality traits, those are given a lot of weight in the application process as well, for sure. So, in terms of soft skills that I think are important for students, I think one of the most important things is their ability to communicate, their ability to communicate respectfully, their ability to engage in intellectual discussions in the classroom setting, and their ability to speak comfortably with adults. So, these are all slightly different types of communication and public speaking, but I absolutely think that is one of the most important soft skills for students. Another pretty obvious one probably is leadership. So, when we're thinking about things that teachers can say about students in letters of recommendation, they're going to be talking about, is this a student who is a leader in classroom discussions? Do they introduce new ideas? Is this someone the teacher sees as a thought partner? Is this student coming to the teacher before or after class and being like, I read this thing I'm so excited about? And again, that goes back to like communication as well and being comfortable kind of having those kind of discussions with adults. Similarly, I think like intellectual curiosity and open-mindedness to other perspectives, we're seeing a lot of prompts for on college applications asking students about a time they disagreed with someone or what kind of unique contribution they may make. Being able to show and have stories to tell that demonstrate that you're open-minded and you are interested in learning about different perspectives, I think is really important. And then finally, another thing that I think can come across in letters of recommendation as well is empathy and how we treat other people. It's maybe a very basic one, but I sometimes have worked with students who don't necessarily demonstrate that. And I wonder what will be said in letters of recommendation. So that's definitely an important thing as well. Just thinking about those teacher relationships from the very beginning of high school. But again, approaching them in a genuine way, not necessarily with the end goal in mind of a letter of recommendation 4 years from now, but just treating teachers with respect and trying to be a leader in the classroom as much as possible.
Do admissions officers actually value certain traits from students? Because not everybody's like an extrovert. Some of them are more introverted, shy. Maybe they don't take leadership roles, but are there other traits and qualities that admissions officers value?
Absolutely. Students don't have to have all of them. So I am actually someone who's an introvert myself. I was a quieter, more shy student. And so I very much understand those students and bond with them. And I think there are plenty of like strong traits that you can show, even if you are quieter, more shy student. I do think that finding opportunities in smaller group discussions where you're more comfortable to take on leadership roles is great. I do still encourage students who are quieter or more shy to find ways to get those leadership opportunities. And again, it doesn't have to be like a loud thing. You do not have to be like the president of a club. But I think that intellectual curiosity is another trait that admissions officers are really excited about and looking for. What do you nerd out about? What can you talk about in a super nerdy way that makes you really excited? And if that genuine passion and excitement can come through in your essays, that's really important. One of the main things that students have to write about is their academic interests. And it's very easy to see the difference between an essay that a student's written that they think they're saying what the admissions officer wants to hear, but it's maybe some kind of a strategic major that they're not that interested in, versus a student who is like genuinely super excited. Taking the example of the student I used before again. This is a student who's going to be staying up till 4 a.m. to work on his body core just for fun, right? So that kind of intellectual curiosity is really important as well. And again, I think that the empathy connects as well to like community service and impact and how you treat others. And so there are lots of ways to be a leader in the community, again, without being like super loud or leading a club. I think there's a lot of service activities that students can do to demonstrate that empathy and those kind of qualities as well.
In middle school, even in high school, students are always mirroring their friends or peers on what they're doing. They want to do something similar, but in reality, when these students transition to college, colleges are really looking for the differentiating factor, right? So, how can parents help their child during these 8th to 10th grade years?
Definitely. So, one of the things that I was talking about earlier is important, not just throwing activities at students, not just telling them to do things that you have heard other kids do that then that kid got into Harvard, but having students be reflective about what they like and dislike and why, and then strategically planning activities based on those likes and dislikes that also fit together and build off each other. Backing up a little bit, I often see students, if they start with me in 8th grade, like maybe they play an instrument, they do one thing of community service, they're in a couple clubs at school. So they're doing like a little bit of everything, which is great at that age. But as they get older, I think what parents can help them do is that self reflection of the activities you're doing right now. Which ones do you like and why? And which ones do you not like and why? And we get this question all the time about prioritizing time and helping students choose what to keep and what to drop. And that's important. Some parents really focus on more is better, but students have limited time. And so more is not always better. Going more deeply into a few activities that reflect their genuine passion is often a better use of time. Also, building off your question in terms of teenagers at that age just wanting to hang out with friends, I actually think that can potentially help be a motivator because students can absolutely do projects with their friends, and that's great. So the student that I mentioned who started his own project, he did that on his own, but he eventually recruited his robotics team to help him. And then they trained a bunch of other volunteers as well. And so I don't think that diminishes what he did at all. I think it even adds to it because it shows that he led a group of people. So students who want to do projects with their friends, I think that's great. And I think that should be encouraged. If you are doing one of those competitions that is well known, again, let's say Bio Olympiad, like everyone knows about it, lots of parents make their children do it. It is absolutely a differentiator at top schools if you are one of the top scorers. But that is virtually impossible. That is very difficult. And so if you're not going to be one of the top scorers, then it becomes a matter of balancing time again. It's always about time. So it could still be a good thing to do. Do we think that you can get to the semifinalist round? That does mean something. If we feel like the student doesn't have a great chance at earning a high level award, then we want to be mindful of how much time they're putting into competition preparation. Because unlike activities, if you don't win a high level award, that time is for nothing. Whereas I do like to put more time into activities because no matter what the outcome can be included in the application. I also like to push for certain competitions that can be seen as activities as well. So, for example, ISIF is one that I encourage like all my STEM students to do because whatever their science fair project is can absolutely be seen as a rigorous research activity separate from the science fair itself. So, that's an example of I think just a great use of time. There's other ones that like art, creative writing competitions, things like that, or competitions where students can use work they've already done. Again, creative writing, photography, those kinds of things. So it's really just, it's all a game of time. Some competitions are good, but going too heavily on competitions, especially ones that require enormous amounts of preparation like Olympiads, can just be a little bit of a time suck without a ton of value on the other end.
When it comes to transitioning to the junior year, it is considered as one of the most important years in the college admissions process. What are the biggest mistakes that juniors make in their junior year?
Yeah, I think when I start working with new students who come in junior year, we see students who are maybe trying to stack activities at the last minute. So just this like the more the merrier kind of mindset. Whereas the Common App really only allows you to list 10 activities. And so once you hit 10, going over that, There's just diminishing value. The other thing is that admissions officers obviously are aware of this kind of like last minute scramble. And so if all of your activities start in grade 11, that's not going to be a great look. The other thing that I think that older students kind of stress about maybe a little too much is testing. It's a fine line there because top schools are returning to requiring testing. The statistics have never been more competitive in terms of average test scores. So it is a tough testing environment out there. However, I see a lot of juniors just so focused on testing and taking the test over and over again that they're not developing other parts of the persona. So their activity list might be underdeveloped, that kind of thing. It's so hard to tell this is more important than that. But that's where, again, the time prioritization comes into play. We don't advocate for students to just take the SAT over and over again endlessly without an end game in sight. We're looking for you to hit your score goal and then move on and focus on other things.
I'm thinking about like the worst case scenario. If a student hasn't done much in ninth or 10th grade, is their junior year too late to recover?
No, of course not. The thing is that students these days think that they haven't done that much, and then they come and they're like, I'm in this club and this club. I play this instrument. I was in this drama last year. And I've never worked with a student who can't get to 10 activities. Sometimes it's harder than others, and we have to be a little more creative in our brainstorming. But hobbies can be activities too. If put together like a long reading list and you've made a goal to read like, I don't know, the top 100 books of all time. I worked with a student who was an amateur magician, and that was a really interesting hobby that made for some great essays. A lot of times, students are doing things that they don't consider to be impressive to admissions officers, but that can actually be really interesting. It's not only about impressing the admissions officer, it's also about interesting them, holding their interest. It is obviously something that can be challenging, but I've never worked with a student where we could not get to 10 activities.
So I want to talk about strategy now. When it comes to students aiming for the HYPSM, the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and MIT versus very strong top 30 universities, is there like a different planning or strategy when it comes to applying to those schools?
I don't think the strategy is different. I think that the level of accomplishment that you need is different. So you're trying to do all the same things, but you've just got to do them at the very highest level possible. So in that way, it is nice because when you're working all throughout middle school, high school towards this goal, you don't necessarily need to do something different because you want to go to Harvard. You just need to do all of the things to get into a top school. And then by the time junior year rolls around, we'll have a sense as your counseling team of if this is achievable based on everything that you've accomplished to that point. So it just gets harder. So you've got to have great test scores. 1500 plus might be okay for some top 30 schools. 1550 plus is important for Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all those guys. Same with activities and leadership. It's just a different level of leadership and impact. You're still trying to push your leadership and impact as much as possible. No matter what your goal is within the top 30, you need to have that. And it's just a matter of pushing it to another level. For example, like a student that I worked with who got into a lot of those schools recently, she did the US Bio Olympiad competition and she did have a top 10 score in the country. So that's a level of differentiation, right? I'm going to tell all my students to take the Bio Olympiad, but then we're going to have to see how you do. And if you're a semifinalist, you will absolutely have a good chance in the top 30. But yeah, for those very top level schools, it's just the level of achievement that has to be that much higher. When we're putting together a competitive application, one of the first things we do is build the student's application persona. It's one of our favorite words. It's basically just the idea of having a cohesive theme to your application. And an example might be like an aspiring neuroscientist who plans to use creative writing to heal her patients with medicine and a personal touch. That was off the top of my head, so it could be better than that, but I was basing it off a student I've worked with. But the point being that the application persona is incredibly important in the way that it ties the application together. So for that student, we're going to expect to obviously see a strong neuroscience interest throughout her activities, but we're also going to expect to see something about medicine and healthcare and creative writing. And so the student's signature project is generally the thing that ties all of their diverse interests together and makes the application feel more cohesive. So for that student, let's say 2 or 3 of their activities are related to neuro, 2 or 3 activities are related to healthcare, 2 or 3 are creative writing. Then we want them to have their signature project that ties in all of those interests together so that they don't feel like, okay, this is just an activity list of all this kid's separate interests, but it's very clear that this is like a cohesive theme to their application. So definitely those kinds of passion projects, signature projects are really one of the most important parts of the work we do. And then outside of the activity list, it's also one of the most common things students write about in their essays as well. And so I think it's definitely an important part of the student's profile and application. And also, I think one of the most fun parts of our work together.
So, final question. What should parents be focusing on during the 8th to 10th grade years that actually makes the biggest difference later on? So, is there like a certain support system that they need to have when the students actually transition to their junior year? And how can parents help during this time?
I've worked with so many parents, and I think that the winning formula, I guess I would say, is like a mix of being supportive and giving students space and freedom to pursue the things they're genuinely interested in, combined with some kind of discipline, motivation, organization, and accountability. On the one hand, parents who are overly involved and who are dictating to their students everything that they should do, that's not necessarily going to be the key to success. But on the other hand, parents should absolutely be involved. And I think that self reflection piece is really important, facilitating the student's reflection on what activities are you doing? Why are you doing them? How can we further increase your impact in this activity or drop it if it's not really fitting into the application persona we're trying to build? So that kind of like regular like organization, discipline, and self-reflection so that they're approaching what they do with an end goal in mind, I think is really important and something that the parents can bring because students get lost in that.
Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or feedback on what you'd like us to cover next on our podcast, do let me know in the comment section or send me an email. All the details are in the description box below. And again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.